Good afternoon, colleagues. Can I just check, TK, can you hear me?
Hi, Rita. Yes, I can hear you very well.
Okay, thank you.
Pleasure.
So good afternoon, colleagues. There are about 148 people. There are 148 people in the room, and we are expecting over 200, but it's 1 o'clock. So we are going to start. As you know, we record and then TK makes the recording available on YouTube. But just to welcome everybody and to say thank you for joining us again after the holiday break. I hope you had a good rest or were able to take some time off with your families. And yes, then we'll commence now on a monthly basis again with the QAF lunch hours. We'll keep you informed about the next one. But this one is going to be about qualification standards in the quality assurance framework. And Dr. Sanele Nene, the Director for National Standards and Reviews, will be delivering on that. But he will also talk to how qualification standards are working currently, I think, and then we'll look at how they will function in the QAF. So just to say welcome to everybody again, and especially to say thank you to him for offering and being willing to do the session for us. So I'm going to hand right over to him so that we don't waste any time. But I just want to alert you that we are at a conference venue and we are a bit nervous about the Wi-Fi and sound and all of those things. So we are monitoring it. Collins is also here. We are monitoring it. If you have any issues, if you can't hear us or if we're breaking up or anything, just let us know on the chat so that we can see what we can do in terms of the technicalities. But it seems that so far it's working okay. So thank you very much again, everybody, and I'll hand over to Sonele then.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zavada. Colleagues, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me well. If I may ask for a thumbs up just to be sure that I can be heard. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you. I suppose we're going to have an interesting discussion, but a simple one. And I would ask that you forgive me because when we start, it's going to seem like it is all over the place when in fact the point in the end will be made. So please bear with me and just follow me as we proceed with this presentation. As we stated, that Dr. Zavada just stated, we're going to touch on a few things, but there are some disclaimers I will make as we proceed with the presentation so that we at least are on the same side or at least on the same page in terms of what it is that we need to understand about what I'm trying to say for purposes of the QAF going forward. So if I may try and share my slide, I'm going to, okay, pull up the presentation. Okay, I hope you can see that. Colleagues. So we're talking today about the role of qualification standards in the quality assurance framework. And in so doing, may I ask that you just bear with me because there are some things that I don't think are necessary to do in this forum and at this time. And one is this presentation is not designed to go into detail about the HEQSF, the framework governing the development of the qualification standards and so forth. It is really designed to locate qualification standards in the quality assurance framework. A discussion that goes into detail into the HEQSF and the frameworks themselves, I think will take away from what it is that we're trying to achieve today. So that's really the first point I wanted to make, and I will ask that you bear with me. Our conversation will touch a bit on these instruments that I've just mentioned, but they're not really designed to speak directly to them. To start with, I just want to start with a bit of a mind game. when we speak about quality or qualification standards, if I may ask you, when you look at these words, these concepts on the screen, which do you think apply to qualification standards? And which do you think do not? I've just thrown in the words there: qualifications, standards, democracy, quality, growth, and many others. Those are random concepts, but they have a source, and that source is based on what we draw from in terms of the higher education context, which is also linked to the South African context as a whole. We will come back to this particular slide, but when we come back to it, it might have changed based on our discussion about what it is that we're seeking to do. To start with, as we always start, we have to define the legal mandate. And there are two instruments that are actually very important for us. One is the Higher Education Act 101 of 1997, which establishes the CHE. And I'm not going to go into much detail here, except to say that it is important to highlight that one of our primary responsibilities as the CHE is to advise the Minister on higher education matters. The second is to monitor and evaluate developments in the higher education space. Okay, thank you. The other, and which is more important, is the one that is really the responsibility that is assumed by the Higher Education Quality Committee, the HEQC, which has the responsibility on behalf of the CHE Council to take over the responsibility of quality assurance in the space, at least be responsible for quality assurance in higher education. And this is done through a number of instruments, institutional audits, which as we move towards the QAF are no longer going to be institutional audits, they're going to be institutional reviews, as we know, quality promotion and program accreditation, those instruments. And then the contribution towards the higher education through research, you know this, we do this in a number of areas. We have a whole functional area that is dedicated to research in this space. And then also there are new mandates as an addition to the Higher Education Act mandate, which derives from the ministerial determination and regulations. And the ministers asked us to work with transformation. And this is a key one, which will be very central to our discussions today and going forward. Then we have the National Qualifications Framework, which establishes the CHE as a quality council, one of the three quality councils in the PSET space. As a Quality Council for Higher Education, we are responsible for developing and managing the HEQSF, the Higher Education Qualifications Sub-Framework. And then when you read that sub-framework, you will see exactly what it is that we're supposed to do in that space. We're also responsible for developing and implementing policies and criteria around the HEQSF and recommending qualifications to SAQA through the HEQSF for registration into the NQF. Again, we take overall responsibility for the management of the HEQSF as part of the NQF. With this comes the qualification standards and around the HEQSF, and this is where our focus will be, because it is our responsibility as the CHE. But when we speak about the qualification standards in the HEQ, as a result of the HEQSF, we have to link that with the overall standards in the QAF. I've just touched on a few summaries because I think you might be familiar with the notion of standards in the QAF, as we've been talking about it for some time now. And the standards generally in the QAF are meant to provide benchmarks developed through the sector, through the COPs, communities of practice. And this is an important point I wanted to highlight, and that is the CHE itself does not develop standards. The CHE develops or facilitates a process in which the sector, through communities of practice, develops the standards. So the standards belong to the sector. What we do is just are custodians of the process by which they get to be developed. The second purpose, again, these are very highly summarized purposes of the standards in the QAF, is to inform and guide the design of institutional quality assurance systems. And this is linked to some of the principles that we are going to touch on of the QAF. As we move forward, we like to emphasize the notion and the idea that internal quality assurance is responsibility of individual institutions. What we focus on as the CHE is assessing, evaluating the extent to which institutions meet those requirements of taking responsibility for internal quality assurance. To inform and guide the design and approval and provision of programs and qualifications, which is where the qualification standards are located and where we would like to focus. And then also to really speak about improvements and enhancement in quality in higher education. So our standards are designed to guide many of our processes as the CHE and the sector, including and especially quality assurance related processes. Two types of standards in the QAF. Again, this is something that you're going to be familiar with as you engage with the instruments that we have. We have qualification standards and higher education practice standards. I've not put those in any particular order of importance there. They're just randomly placed there. Qualification standards are generic statements of learning domains, which really speak to a qualification and the attributes around the graduates that are expected from a graduate in line with the qualification and the purpose of a qualification, and all the programs associated with the qualification also being aligned to that generic statements. We're going to come back to this because I think it's very important to understand what we mean by these statement and these concepts, and what the difference between a qualification standard is and the any type of other standard would be. Because when we look at qualification standard, we start making this particular distinction about the generic nature of the standard related to a qualification along the lines or within the HEQSF parameters, it becomes confusing to understand what the difference is. A qualification standard would be between that and a standard used by a professional body for the registration or professional registration of graduates. That is very, very important for us. Higher education practice standards are codes of practice for specific functional areas. And we would have really touched on this very, I think, heavily in the earlier discussions that we've had about what it is that we seek to do with HAPS. HAPS are overarching, and in terms of what we're going to do, they're going to inform quite a number of activities going forward. I see a hand. My apologies, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nene, and sorry to interrupt you. I just want to find out, the qualification standards also refer to graduate attributes and then standards. Um, I wish to know what the place of the outcomes are in the QAF, especially since we still use exit level outcomes and so on in the SACWA documentation. Thank you.
Right. Can we come back to this question? But I would just like clarity perhaps before, when you speak about outcomes of a qualification standard or of a review standard, what exactly when you speak about outcomes, so that maybe as we proceed, our response is tailored to the question?
Yeah, if I just look at qualification standards and its description there, it says the qualification standards are generic statements of learning domains, the level of achievement, and the graduate attributes that characterize, etc., etc. And then as generic statements, qualification standards apply to all programs leading to the award of the qualification type. So we do have the qualification standard, and then also, as described there, the learning domains, can I say just foci of the qualification standards. I want to know what is the place of the outcomes of a qualification within the qualification standards, please. Thank you.
Right. The qualification standards are linked to the HEQSF, and that's linked to the NQF, the exit level outcomes. That is really the focus of the qualification standard. If you were to look at the qualification standard, you'll see one of the first things you would look at would be the exit level outcomes linked to the national qualifications framework as contained in the HEQSF. That is the role of the outcomes in the qualification standards in this place. I'm not sure if you want to open the space now for some questions, but let me take this question. Was it Ronald or Ronald? Sorry, I didn't get them. Yes. Yeah, please.
Thanks. I have looked at the definition of the qualification standards several times, and I think I understand what you mean. But it looks to me as if the actual way in which qualifications are going forward in terms of the accreditation, is that you actually, if you want to submit a new qualification, then let me just give an example. It seems to me that it's contradictory that you talk about the generic statement and all qualification that lead to that kind of qualification type will have to have that characteristic. But on your website, you have qualification standards for a diploma in emergency care. So I would say that is it not qualification standards for diploma? Why is it so specific? I mean, it really goes to a specific field domain. Then it sort of contradicts the genericness of the intent. Or am I interpreting this incorrectly?
Thank you. Uh, what I'm about to say will cover some of the aspects in the presentation. That is why I was saying it's going to be all over the place, although I didn't intend it to be like this. But let's flow with the way in which the conversation is going. When we say generic, specific to a qualification, so it's not generic to all qualifications. So what you saw and what you see, for example, in the qualification that you're referring to, is specific to that qualification, but generic enough that it accommodates the programs leading to that qualification. In other words, qualification standards are not prescriptive to institutions about the curricula. They are generic in that all of the learning programs, or at least programs, maybe let me be very specific, programs, a set of learning experiences leading towards a qualification. And the qualification is what an institution awards upon attainment or achievement of a certain level of knowledge by a graduate, having met all of the requirements that the institution has met. So what a qualification standard seeks to do is to say you have these attributes that we have placed as a sector. We've reached this level of knowledge. This is pitched at this particular level in line with the qualification type and the exit levels outcomes and every other requirement of the NQF and the HEQSF. And therefore, all programs that lead to that must meet those expectations. It does not say, So it is not to say then that each individual program must be generic. It means to say that the outcomes, the level of knowledge must meet the qualification expectation. So the qualification standard, if you really want to simplify it, is about the attributes that the graduate has at the end of a learning cycle based on the attainment, in line with the purpose of the qualification. So the sector will say this is the purpose. So in the end, based on that purpose, what type of graduates do you want to have? And based on that, what sort of things should go in? So we're speaking about the outer layer of the design of the curriculum, but not really the curriculum, but the qualification itself.
All right. Now I think my question is slightly different, but it's okay. I think let's I want to see what you've got to say, and then we can come back to that. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks. So maybe some of these points are going to be covered. So the qualification standard will articulate minimum thresholds, at least the basic minimum of what a graduate should have, the expectations, the knowledge, and all of those things. So there are minimum thresholds, or at least benchmarks, threshold, the bar. All institutions offering these qualifications must at least have this in place for the qualification to meet the purpose for which it is designed in line with the qualification type. They really speak about the identity, the coherence of a qualification in the sector, across the sector, by which that institutions are going to have to meet and work towards. This is really about ensuring, if you went back to the first slide, or at least the second slide that I had about those terms that I put there, what is it that the qualification standard wants to do? It is really to define the qualification and the purpose of that qualification, what distinguishes that qualification from any other qualification in line with the HQSF as well as the qualification type. It is also in this space to acknowledge the differences and the diversity of programs in the qualification. So the qualification standards do not speak to the curriculum leading to a program. That is left to institutions to do. As long as the programs are in line with what the standard expects at the qualification level, because programs lead towards a qualification. So the discipline experts, the sector, will also set parameters and the limits in terms of the differences in diversity, including the flexibility that institutions have. Our qualification standard seeks to strike a balance between institutional autonomy, flexibility in the sector, innovation, but also ensuring that there is a level of parity across the board. That is really what the qualification standard seeks to do. So when you speak about the things such as the design of programs, we do not speak about really the content from a qualification standard perspective. We're speaking about whether the design conforms to the qualification standard and in line with the qualifications are based on the purpose of the qualification as defined by the sector itself. So the agreement of the sector in setting the design, in setting the qualification standard is important. This is why earlier on I said the COPs are instrumental in this. The sector itself, through the disciplinary experts, are the ones who craft the qualification standard, and all we do is to facilitate that process. And then we work with the sector to ensure that the institutions offering that qualification work towards being aligned to the qualification standard, and work with those institutions to ensure that there is in fact that alignment. There is a need to also understand that we link quality assurance activities of the CHE, which is where really the QAF comes in, and the purpose of the QAF comes in. Qualification standards are not designed to just be standards and then we leave it at that. We need to have a way of saying these are the standards and the institutions have to meet the standards. And so qualification standards would also have criteria and will have reviews in some instances attached to them, because this is part of the quality assurance mandate of the CHE, but also part of the quality responsibility of institutions. So there is that responsibility and the importance of having quality assurance built into the understanding of the purpose of qualification standards linked to the QAF. I've already touched in some detail on the graduate attributes. What is it that you want the graduates to have? The level of skills, the knowledge, the philosophical understanding, the expertise, the competence of that person, depending on whether the qualification is a professional qualification or not. Is the qualification nationally and internationally comparable? And qualification standards seeks to achieve this. This is not to compare institutions, and we'll touch on this later. It's not about comparing institutions. It's not even about ranking institutions. It's about ensuring that at least there is confidence in this sector, and this is a point that's going to come in later. There's confidence in this sector that a graduate of a qualification, regardless of the institution that offered the qualification, has the same competence as any other graduate with the same qualification, and is able to achieve the level of competence, the level of engagement with the field in which they qualified, without worrying about the source or the issuer of the qualification. That's very important. This is a point I'm going to reiterate as we proceed. We've touched on the recognition of institutional autonomy. Institutional autonomy is recognized in the fact that the institutions will develop the programs and they will develop the curriculum in those programs leading to the qualifications. So our way of defining qualification standards is that they do not dictate to institutions about curriculum. They just are very at a generic level, at an outcomes level, without necessarily saying you must offer this, you must offer that. But you actually have to meet certain parameters that the sector itself is going to put in place. There's also issues of how then you use the accreditation criteria or you use a qualification standard to ensure that the programs that have to be accredited in line with the qualification meets the expectations of the qualification standard. I've touched on the confidence of the public in the qualification, or at least in the graduate, that the graduate is able to meet the expectations regardless of where the qualification is from, and that the qualification can also be recognized internationally as well because it meets international standards. The parity of esteem is really, if you look at it carefully, what the QAF is seeking to do, not just in terms of qualification standard, but just ensuring that the sector itself, there is a balance that is struck. We live in a highly unequal society. And through the QAF and some of the standards that we're putting in place, we're trying to get to a point of equity and maybe later to a point of equality without sameness. We're not really aiming for same. We're aiming for parity across the board in terms of the qualification standard. I'm not going to, as I said, go into detail around the HEQSF and the framework for the qualification standards, except to highlight the current format of the qualification standard. Now, it is very important to state that as we move towards the QAF and we're moving towards that, the current instrument we're using will change to be in line with the QAF, to be in line with the HAPS and the qualification standards that are going to be we're going to develop going into the future. So the formats that we are presenting now is in line with the framework that we have and the HEQSF, and all these instruments are under review. The HEQSF, in fact, is also under review. We do not foresee a vast change in the way that we format the qualification standards, but there may be some tweaking here and there as we go forward. So it's important, as you see, that there is the qualification type has to be included, the purpose of the qualification has to be included. Graduate attributes have to be clearly defined because this is really what the qualification standard seeks to do, and then progression also needs to be clearly defined. These are things that are part of a format of a qualification standard. So if you look at all of our qualification standards, you will see this, but it is not really what we're focusing on today. This is what I would like to focus on today. What qualification standards do not do, or at least what they do not aim to do. First, it is to determine access criteria. That is at a level different from what a qualification standard seeks to do. So criteria around access and selection and all those things, those are not for the qualification standard to do, because then we are violating some principles that we do not want to violate about the institution's autonomy to decide on such things, based also on the policies and frameworks that exist in the sector. We do not prescribe duration through the qualification standard of a qualification, but the credits have to be conformed with. And these credits will depend on the level at which the qualification is pitched and the qualification type. Again, this is a decision that will be made at a development level by the COP and by the sector, because the standards do get consulted heavily with the sector. I have repeated this point, and again, I'm going to emphasize this. We do not prescribe a curriculum. That's a different matter. But we do say that the curriculum that's designed in the programs that lead to the qualification has to be within the qualification standard, at least aim to achieve what the qualification standard, and have to be set within the parameters of the discipline itself. There is this qualification standard do not prescribe teaching and learning methods. That's a decision that has to be made at a different level other than at a qualification standard level. The conditions for assessment is not about prescribing what the conditions for assessment would be. It is really to set the context. What is it that would be expected, without saying you must have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in place. So it really is about really broadening the context and the understanding of what sort of assessment considerations need to be in place. How you assess students, whether you use a particular instrument as opposed to the other, is up to the institution. But does it meet what the qualification expects the level of assessment to be? The difference again between qualification standard and HAPS is that we do not speak to, through qualification standards, above threshold practice. We speak to the minimum. What is it that you must have in place to achieve the objectives and the purpose of a qualification standard? I've touched on this point, but it is a point that has come up a number of times, and I think I need to spend a bit of time here. We develop, in many aspects, qualification standards in collaboration with professional bodies where they are professional bodies. And there's a whole discussion about statutory bodies and other professional bodies and the relationship between what they do and what we do as the CAG. There's a process in which we engage with different types of professional bodies to streamline our activities where possible, to clarify the responsibilities between the professional body and the CAG, especially around quality and quality assurance, but also around qualification standards. Qualification standards may be developed with a professional body. In fact, in many instances, may even be initiated in terms of development by a professional body. But what they can't do is to automatically lead to registration of a graduate as a professional in that space. That is not what they're designed to do. That responsibility falls within the professional body. So in a number of instances, you hear people thinking that the qualification standard is a be-all and end-all of standards. It replaces all types of standards, and therefore they must articulate what would be the requirement for registration of an individual or a graduate as a professional. That it really cannot do that. It goes way beyond our mandates as the CAG, but also beyond the purpose of the qualification standards. We have to develop them in line with what a professional body would want to align in terms of the requirements about the level of knowledge and expertise and competence that a person might have as a graduate of the particular qualification. But the registration is still within the professional body's jurisdiction, not within the qualification standard jurisdiction, because qualification standards, although they are developed by the sector, they still are within our jurisdiction as the CAG, and that is not really our purpose. The other point that I want to make, qualification standards are aimed at ensuring, at least to as much as possible, that there's parity or across the sector in a particular field. They do not seek to rank institutions, nor compare institutions. One of the principles of the QAF broadly is really about understanding institutions where they are, and to differentiate the way in which we approach institutions based on the same sets of standards, but apply them in the way that takes into account their own individual context. So the ranking of institutions is not going to happen through a qualification standard or any standard that the CAG develops through the QAF going forward. Now, specifically, to answer the question I started with, what is the role of qualification standards in the QAF now and going forward? And there are a few points I want to make here. One is that the qualification standards serve as frames of reference for EQA and IQA. External quality assurance, which we do as the CAG and professional bodies do that as also part of the external quality assurance, but also internal quality assurance, because the responsibility for quality and quality assurance still rests with the institution, and the quality assurance of a qualification is the responsibility of the institution. Through the qualification standards, which then provide the basis of a criteria, we can then have quality assurance activities against which all institutions must then respond. It will be a common set of criteria that we use to measure the extent to which institutions are able to meet the expectations of and the requirement of a qualification standard. And we do this because the standards are a bedrock of what we do in the QAF. There is no quality assurance activity that the CAG is going to conduct through the QAF that is not going to be underpinned by some sort of standard. And this is where qualification standard also come in. Qualification standard also link in many ways to personal and societal imperatives, what it is that we think a graduate must have, graduate attributes in many cases. And the QAF makes it clear that we think institutions are a site of, if you May Nadia, please. Thank you. So we did not develop the QAF for the sake of it. We would like to see the graduates coming out of our higher education system being agents of change and being changed themselves, because the institutions of higher education are places where such a change happens. So the graduates that come out of a qualification must also be graduates that we would like to expect coming out of higher education system. Those who are critical, those who are active as citizens, those who are competent, who have personally gone through certain transformations, but also drivers of transformation through the knowledge that they gain in institutions. So there's a whole range of principles that we speak to in the QAF that qualification standards seek to achieve, at least contributes towards achieving. So if you look at some of the principles in specifically, and this list is not exhaustive, I just thought I should identify ones that are directly affected by qualification standards. The first being that the institution is responsible for EIQA, which I've touched on, but also issues about integration. The qualification standards speak to standards, or part of the standards, and those standards have to be linked across the activities of the CHE as an external quality assurance body, but also the institution's own design of its own programs and qualifications, and the quality assurance mechanisms around the management of programs qualifications have also to be integrated so that there's coherence, there's synergy in service to the graduates and in service to the broader society. I've touched on the issue of differentiation. Again, what we mean by this is that although you have the same set of standards, you have the same set of criteria, these are applied in the way that takes into account the peculiarities, the uniqueness, the context of an individual institution. And how you apply this set of criteria and standard has to be informed by what the institution's vision, mission, and goal, resource, and all these things that define the identity of the institution are in place, and how the institution interprets these things in line with what the context demands. Collaboration across the sector within the institutions is very important, and this is a principle of the QAF that qualification standards actually respond to. I want to go back to where we started, and I'm not sure if my game has been successful. Whether you can spot and agree with some of the concepts or terminology to which the qualification standard contributes more directly. This is similar but different in some ways to the first iteration of this slide. The qualification standard contributes in the higher education sector in many ways, but not all of the ways. And in some ways, I've removed some terms or concepts that I think maybe do not directly apply to qualification. But I've left one to see if in fact it could be spotted or if there is an agreement. These are not set in stone, but it is important to understand that qualification standards are an instrument largely designed to create parity in the sector. Largely designed to ensure that the graduates of a qualification have the knowledge, the skills, the competence that would be expected to benefit the space, to benefit society, but also to benefit the graduates themselves. So there is a purpose behind qualification standard that cannot be extended beyond qualification standards. They are not designed to take away the autonomy of the institution, but they also have to balance that institutional autonomy with societal imperative. And that is a balance that is quite tricky and can be contested at times, but it is very important going forward. Qualification standard look into the now, but also have to have a view of the future as we see it, or at least as the sector sees it. For example, the role of technology is very important in the design of the qualification standard and also the programs leading to the awarding of that qualification. In everything we do through the QAF, we emphasize reflexivity. The institutions also have to be continuously reflexive about the qualifications that they offer in terms of whether they meet the standard that the sector has put in place. And so there's a number of areas, at least concepts that I think qualification standards contribute towards. But there may be more. The list is not really exhaustive. But I would like to see if, in fact, what I've put there as suggestions you agree with, and whether if you go back to the initial slide around this, you think maybe the things that I've taken out without pointing which I have taken out have to be brought back in or not. So that's really the story around the importance of qualification standards in the QAF. Again, I want to, as I close, state that some of the instruments we use are under review, and therefore some of the things, but not majorly, but there's some of the things that we are currently doing will slightly change in the way that we will approach them going forward. The HQSF, for example, is under review, and the frameworks that we use will definitely be under review, and will be in many ways subsumed by the manuals that we're now in the process of developing, in line with the requirements of the QAF. But also there are engagements about aligning our processes, our understanding of these instruments with other bodies that we work with, such as SAQA and DHEADS, and where you might see that maybe there's a distinction or a difference between what we say and what SAQA says. We would be aware in some instances of that and would be working towards creating those synergies, because QAF again is about integration, simplification, and streamlining these instruments in this sector, so that there is a less onerous process around quality and quality assurance in the sector, and issues around accreditation going forward. Colleagues, let me thank you and stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nene. Can I just check that I'm audible?
Yes, you are, Britta.
Thanks, TK. Okay, can we go back to this question, to the questions maybe? So yes, just to confirm again, we will send the presentation as we always do. I see some colleagues are responding to the terms, the equality, context, access, success. Somebody adding responsive. Angelique, will the CHE adjust the program? Sorry, I just need to fix something here. Just hold on. Will the CHE adjust the program accreditation form for new programs to reflect the QAF qualification standards? I don't know if they will do that directly in relation to the qualification standards, but the program accreditation form will change under the QAF at some stage. We are working on that, and it'll depend also in terms of the new accreditation online. So the form will change. So just in terms of the form, there will be a change, but then I think the main point is that new accreditation applications for qualifications for which there are qualification standards will have to conform to those. Then Odwa, I see, yeah, clarifying the definition of terms. That's something that we're always working on. It is difficult, between qualification, academic program, learning program, specialization, and so on. That's an ongoing debate, which we're not necessarily going to solve in this program, in this session. Okay, thanks, TK. I just want to see. Yes, the need, Sharon, I see the need for a glossary. I'll make a note of that. We did start on a glossary, but we also have to consult, I think, with SAQA and DHEAD so that we all have the same definitions, so that they, across the different bodies, regulatory bodies. So that's the comment so far. Sharon, yes, you've got your hand up. Yes, Shirley says there is the InQFpedia. Sharon?
Thanks so much, Dr. Britta. Yes, that will be very helpful if the consultation between the other regulatory body is done. That will be helpful for us as institutions. I noticed that the duration of the qualifications, that the CHE is not going to that's not part of the qualification standard, or the CHE does not wish to interfere with that, if I can use that word. But I think that the minimum time for which we will be subsidized by the DHET will remain as is in the HEMIS requirements and regulations. And I'm also very happy to see in the second slide of Dr. Nene, the third and the fourth bullet seems to provide a differentiation between qualifications and programs, and that is also welcome. I think that would also then refer to the CHE documentation. We have the accreditation for program criteria that we can regard as qualification criteria, etc., etc. So then also the HQSF online uses the term program. So I think also for institutionally, we may regard that then as qualification application, Dr. Britta. And I am saying all of these things because I'm making links, for where we were, where we are, and where we're going to, so that all makes sense to us, to me, eventually, and I can clearly see, where the differences come in, etc. So that is welcome, and I would like an exposition on the graduate attributes, please. And then, yeah, I have just made a few notes here of the question. The qualification standards role with relation to the HEQSF and the accreditation criteria would also be appreciated. And then, yeah, I have another 3 or 4, but I'm going to stop there just to give other colleagues also a chance. Thank you.
I see also there's a question in the chat, Sanele, from Redwan Jawuddin. Kindly provide a brief overview of integration, differentiation, and collaboration. Do you want to start there and then go to some of Sharon's questions?
No, thank you. Thank you very much, colleagues. Perhaps let's start with the question in the chat. The integration is twofold. The integration is in the way in which the quality assurance processes of the CHE continue, they are structured, and how they seek to achieve the purposes of the QAF in a seamless, streamlined sort of way. The qualification standard, for example, also will speak to integration in a way that the programs are designed, and the quality assurance of those standards is designed such that it speaks to all aspects of the qualification being managed efficiently and effectively within the institution, but also between the institution and the sector as a whole, particularly the balance between the IQA and the EQA. So that is really integration. It's a continuous process. It is not to say everything must be the same, but the process is leading towards particularly quality review and quality management is streamlined as much as possible. Differentiation is we have to consider that institutions are not the same. Even institutions that offer the qualification are not the same. For example, we may speak of a qualification that both public and private institutions offer. And there was mention of a subsidy around a particular qualification in relation to duration. Also think about the level at which private institutions receive or do not receive any subsidy from the state on the qualifications that they offer. So differentiation is an approach. An approach that says we have the same set of standards. We have the one qualification standard for a qualification, and that qualification standard has to be applied consistently across the institution in the sector. However, when applying it, you must understand that institutions have their own challenges, they have their own context that they must contend with, they must respond to, based in part and largely, in fact, on their own identity, on their own vision, mission, statement, goals, and so forth. So differentiation is to consider where institutions are. It is not to say because you are here, then you are not required to meet the standard. It is to say we are here, we understand where you are, but in this context in which you are, how do you then meet the standard? And collaboration is about the way in which you develop the standards collaboratively with the professional body, collaboratively as the sector, and also the application and of the standard between the external quality assurance body, the internal quality assurance body, and how even within the institution, the delivery of the qualification through the programs is also done collaboratively in the way that makes sense, in the way that actually assures coherence in the qualification. So those really would be the broad terms that I would like to maybe, I hope, make sense in that space. The graduate attributes really are about the competence, the knowledge, the level of achievement that the student or a graduate is expected to have from a qualification. So it is the things that you would want a doctor, for example, to be able to do at minimum. The competence, what is it that a graduate of a law degree should be able to do as a graduate without even additional training? So, coming out of an institution, what is it that they should have? And these are different types of knowledges that go into the qualification. In some spaces in professional qualifications, there would be other things that, other than the conceptual knowledge, the practical knowledge that the student or graduate must have. That is what really we mean about attributes. I don't want to call it qualities because that's a different term, but it's the things that you would expect from a graduate, from a qualification in service to the sector or the field that the qualification seeks to serve. That is what we mean by this. I do take the point that maybe at some of the definitions still require a bit more clarity. And maybe we'll do that and we'll attend to this as we develop our instruments. So those, I don't know if I'm answering these questions quite well, but it is important to understand that the qualifications are not the same, and therefore the qualification standards are not going to be the same. Not all qualifications will have the same exit level outcomes. It also, that is defined by the QAF, and that is defined by the disciplinary experts in terms of what it is that qualification through the qualification standard must be able to achieve. Each qualification has to have a purpose, and that purpose the qualification standard seeks to clarify. What is the purpose of this qualification, and how do you then address this purpose through the things that must fit into the qualification, the programs, and how you assess based on what the purpose is. This is what the qualification standard focuses on. I'm not sure if I've covered these a few questions that have been raised.
Thanks, Sanele. Yeah, it's interesting how the conversation always hots up a bit as we start the conversation. So a lot of the questions are around the graduate attributes and how they link. And I'm going to combine some of the questions in the chat for you. So the first, Jennifer asks where can they find the existing standards, and maybe a list of the existing standards, and then what are future plans for developing new standards? And then Linda asks in a similar vein, are they only going to be standards for professional type qualifications like nursing or sports coaching and so on? And what happens in the case of there not being any standards? Maybe you can answer those first.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zavat. I must confess our website is not the best website in the world. We are working towards improving it, but you can find our qualifications, the approved qualification standards on our CHE website. The request to maybe have a list of all of the available qualification standards is one that is taken and noted. Maybe we'll publish that list in the website. There are currently qualification standards being developed. We are almost always developing some type of qualification standard. You might, for example, be aware that we just in the process, in fact, we've just concluded the public commons phase of the Bachelor of Education and Postgraduate Certificates in Education draft qualification standards. We are working on the development of a community development or Bachelor of Community Development qualification standards. We're working on other qualification standards in currently, which will then be made public to the sector. And it is not just professional standards that we are working with. We are looking at working with the general qualification standard. In fact, those very big qualifications such as your Bachelor of Arts, we're looking at developing standards around that space because we do think it is an important space to pay attention to. Where there currently isn't a qualification standard, things continue as they are. The institutions are responsible for the management of quality in those standards. And I must say, in this space, we have a lot of qualifications in the higher education space. It will take time to develop qualification standard for all of those qualifications. This is why we say at the most, they have to emphasize the point that the institution is responsible for the management of quality in their own provisioning. So all of your academic programs, all of your activities around your managing your academic projects as a whole, your research, your community engagement has to have a strong foundation in the quality assurance management, so that at least we know that things do not fall by the wayside whilst waiting for a qualification standard. But again, I want to emphasize, qualification standards do not answer all of the questions that you might seek answers to. Qualification standards are at a very, very high level. They're very generic. There are still things that institutions have to do at a program level and things that have to be done even at a curricular level. So it really is important that we keep that in mind as we proceed. But certainly we have to look at making that list available, and I've made a note of that. Thank you.
And Ntok also posted a link in the chat, which will also help. So I'm answering some of the sort of more straightforward questions in the chat directly. There could be, and have been in the past, actually qualification standards for high certificates and diplomas as well. I want to go back to a question by Sharon. What is the role of the qualification standards in relation to the HQSF and the program accreditation criteria? And I think we can link the SAQA exit level outcomes. They all these, and I think that's some of the difficulty for colleagues. They all these documents which say similar things, which talk to similar processes, but which are not exactly the same. Maybe if you can speak to that, please, Sanele.
Yeah. It really also is about the maybe the clarity that I think we still need to provide, maybe even in the instruments. Qualification standards are derived from and have to be in line with the HQSF. And that is really where the qualification standard comes from. So the HQSF is linked to the NQF. In fact, it is derived from the NQF. What we're currently working on is to ensure that there's synergy between, and in fact, in a number of instances, there's synergy between accreditation criteria with qualification standards, particularly when they do reviews. So, for example, if we do a review of a qualification standard, the outcome being confirmation of accreditation or a withdrawal of accreditation using accreditation criteria as we currently have it. So that's really is a link because we are all working on the HQSF and the requirements of the HQSF, and our criteria has to be based on that. in terms of process, that synergy is becoming stronger and stronger through the QAF. At least, perhaps if I were to backtrack, one of the pillars of the QAF is integration in terms of how the CHE does its own work internally, but in relation to institutions. That is maybe at the heart of why we came up with the QAF, was to say we do too many things that end up confusing the sector around similar sort of concerns. So why is it that we have these multiple activities when in fact these can be integrated such that we have more streamlined processes? And as we move towards more effective implementation and fuller implementation of the QF, this is really what we're speaking to. So as you see in the QF and the instruments that are now going to be, in fact, they're under development, that are going to be consulted about how we do things, you will see a lot of integration between the design of the qualification standards, the development of the qualification standards, the design of accreditation processes and the criteria around the accreditation process, one feeding to the other, and how quality reviews also form part of that, how quality enhancement and promotion also forms part of that. There is a strong synergy, but we're emphasizing a stronger and clearer, simpler integration going forward.
I think one way to also think about it is that we must always remember that program accreditation criteria are at the input phase. It's a promise the institution makes about how they are going to do the program, what they are going to do. The qualification standard spans the delivery, the assessment, the certification, the outcomes, and the attributes, and therefore forms also the basis for that whole value chain. And it, in a way, almost then checks if the institution did what they promised during the accreditation phase. So Odwa asked Sanele, will there be national reviews for each qualification once the standards are approved?
This is a tricky because it's a process issue. It is a resource issue. It is also about the timing. Ideally, we would like to have a review linked to every qualification standard. And you can have two types of reviews. One that is about alignment, to check how far the extent to which the institutions aligned with a qualification standard. The other would be about confirmation of accreditation in line with what Dr. Zavada has just said based on the accreditation criteria. Now, given the number of qualification standards that have been developed and they're still being developed, and the number of quality review activities that we're undertaking, the size of the sector, the size of the CHE as a quality council and an external quality assurance body, the need to consider quality fatigue, review fatigue from the institutions, and also the need to consider the principles of the QAF about simplification and leaving much of the internal quality assurance of internal processes to institutions. I cannot say that all of the qualifications will then be accompanied by or followed by a review, although ideally it would be good to have that. If we were to do that, given the challenges we have, it could cause some fatigue in the sector, especially because the way in which some of the institutions are structured, you have similar people or the same people dealing with all types of reviews or for all types of quality assurance processes, and it might create a burden that we do not yet want to create. At least we do not want to create, not yet, in the sector. But the resources at this stage do not permit that all of the qualification reviews will be followed by a quality review. This is also linked to one of the questions that I think I just saw in the chat. What happens to the current programs when there's a new qualification standard? The expectation would be the institution would try as far as possible to align the programs to the qualification standard, as long as those programs lead towards the award of that qualification. It may mean then engaging on other processes around the accreditation of those programs, but there has to be some work. Now, also remember that the QAF seeks to give the rights to institutions to approve their own programs. And in that space, if your quality, after all the reviews have been considered, all the quality assurance or quality related data has been considered through the quality, this QAF MIS or the CHE MIS system, and the CHE or HEQC has made a pronouncement about the functionality of the institution. If you receive a certain level of functionality as an institution, you then would be able or responsible for the approval of programs. How that's done, that's still going to be trashed out in fact, we're working on the manuals to really truly clarify what we mean by that. So we also keep that in mind, that the alignment is also about ensuring that you do not always provide all of the programs and the changes to the CHE to approve, as well as the qualification, because that's really has been a problem or a challenge in the past, that some of that responsibility will go to the institution, provided that the mechanisms for managing quality have been deemed to be sound enough that the institution can be trusted to manage this process on its own. Thank you.
So I want to respond to Linda's question about the SAQA ID and to Odwa's question about the template, sort of in one go, if you'll allow me. And maybe just to say that we are really working with SAQA. Dr. Dlamini, who's the director for the management of the HEQSF, is leading that conversation from our side. There are a number of issues around these SAQA IDs and what SAQA does and does not give individual IDs too. It's not something Sanele and I are qualified to speak on, because we do in the end have our own specializations, but Dr. Dlamini will also then be in a QAF lunch hour, and then she can report on some of those conversations. And yes, Odwa, we are working on, once we go onto the new accreditation online, that we will incorporate the SAQA requirements into that. You will recall that there was this joint accreditation and registration form that we had with SAQA, and it was almost a pilot for how this would work, and admittedly it did not work very well. So the joint kind of evaluation and checklisting didn't work well for the accreditations at that stage, but we are in conversation with them. But it is a process, and these are not necessarily easy questions that we're going to solve, but we are in conversation with SAQA to try and to get to some point where we can then maybe make it easier for you. So Aniki, no, the process of program standards or qualification standards does not align with the re-registration of qualifications. That would just, I think, be too complex, because the process of developing a standard is quite, it's a long-term thing. I think it takes 18 months to 2 years, Fundi, to develop a qualification standard, because it is such a consultative process. And sometimes there are hiccups, people are not available, and so that might take a bit longer. I think Andre's question was similar to an earlier one. How maybe he's asking, Sanele, how long will institutions have between when a standard is developed until the review happens, to allow people to get their house in order, so to speak? Maybe you want to speak to that?
Yeah, we don't know. We are planning for the process to be quick. So it's a qualification standard in the way that we now have it, and in the way that we seek to do it, and we're locating it in the QAF, will have to be followed by an extensive capacity development process. And then a review only happens after we are satisfied that there's been sufficient capacity development and advocacy around a specific qualification standard. It is unfair to have a qualification standard today and then ask institutions to then go through a review of that qualification standard without having had a conversation about the capacity and the understanding of that qualification standard in relation to what the institutions have. Ideally, I think a period between a year to 2 years between the qualification standard, the capacity development, and then the implementation of a review around the qualification standard. But again, you have to keep in mind that you might have 2 or 3 qualification standards that are approved almost around the same time, and how you time that has to be very carefully orchestrated, because some institutions will be affected by all the qualifications that are approved at around the same time. So I can't give you a specific time frame at this stage, because we are not there yet. there are capacity issues that have to be addressed, even at the sector level. But also there's timing that has to be very carefully considered. Again, I want to go back to the point that I made earlier. We do not want to overburden institutions with reviews and reviews upon reviews without also giving them time to reflect on the extent to which the reviews have assisted the institutions to improve their own quality and how well they are doing as an institution. That reflexivity is also important because the institutions must breathe in between these processes. Otherwise, we will not be able to be in a position of understanding the impact of these processes to the institutions, to the sector. It would just be an automated machinery of reviews after reviews based on the new qualification standards or current qualification standards. So we still need to finalize those things, but the timelines have not yet been settled at this stage.
Yeah, and maybe just to add, I think that alignment process that we spoke about earlier, if you have an existing qualification and a qualification standard comes out, the institution should really use that opportunity of aligning as a reflexive moment where they can then actually look at their qualification and see how it measures up against the standard, and just to encourage institutions to document those processes, document their experiences. Obviously, if you then make changes to the qualification that have to come to the CHE, if it's more than 50%, remember it's a new qualification that has to go through program accreditation. But if it's less than 50%, it's a change to an existing qualification, which follows a different process. But to really keep those documents as part of your internal quality assurance reflexivity. Then I just wanted to say to Shirley that the same applies to SAQA's policy requirements for 3 to 5 year qualification reviews. We are in discussion with them, and they have already agreed to lend, because it's a capacity issue, both on our side and on their side, that we cannot do this. I think this was very aspirational to have this every 3 to 5 years, and that we will change this to 5 to 8 years, and also link it to the IQA functionality, as we had said earlier on. So yes, that is still a conversation, and we will communicate with you as soon as there's clarity on that. Colette, when will the HEPS and the qualification standards be available or implemented? There are qualification standards which are already there. It's a process that started in 2013, I think, Fundi, around 2013, and was based on the framework for the development of qualification standards before. So this is an activity that we've been doing that we continue into the QAF. And so those qualification standards that are in place, you should already be aligned to, and are already implemented. So that's important for you to note that. The HEPS we have in draft form, and we will go to consultation on them in the second half of this year.
Perhaps if I may add.
Yeah.
I think what's coming out, in fact, is something that we've already recognized, that there's a need to emphasize and strengthen advocacy around the qualification standard, but it doesn't seem to be a process that some institutions or some colleagues in the sector understand very well. And it's a process that has been there, as you've said, for a long time. But we need to strengthen it, and we are planning on strengthening it. Again, we thought we were doing a good job in making the qualification standards known, but it seems like we need to do more in this area. But we would also link that to the standards, generally speaking, as we proceed through the QAF, strengthening and understanding around the standards, what they are, what they mean, how they are applied, and how they're to be assessed going forward. So it's a project on its own that we are really giving attention to through the QAF. Thank you.
I see there's mentioned of Dr. Dlamini's workshops, which he is doing together with SAQA at the moment, and these are continuing. You can, I don't know, TK, where's the information on the HEQSF workshops where people can access that? Maybe you can post a link for that as well. And then Odwa, yes, the 50% is a difficult thing, and it's also a conversation that we are having. But just a few rules of thumb, which I think you must bear in mind. The outcomes of the exit level and the outcomes of the qualification cannot change. As soon as you change that, it's a new qualification, right? The 50%, then how you manage that with and how you decide what that is something that the senates of the universities have to decide on. But then also it's important to remember you can't change 50% this year and 50% next year, because then you've changed 100% of the qualification. And I'm being deliberate now in being silly, but it's what we call curriculum drift. 50% is over the lifetime of the qualification. So if you change 10% this year and another 30%, and then you want to change another 20%, then it's actually a new qualification. And yes, you know, this 50% is maybe a mirage that we talk about, but it is something that we are trying to look at. I want to get back to Sharon's question about the above threshold institutional qualification standard. Will this influence the accreditation outcome of a new qualification? For example, if you include a research component in a diploma. And I have an initial response to this, but I want Sanele to come in after I've said my piece. I think it's very important not to call that an above threshold practice, because you are valuing a research type qualification higher than a diploma, and you are actually changing the purpose of the diploma. By adding a research component into the diploma, you're changing the purpose, and that is a HEQSF matter. So I would be very careful to do something like that. You would have to be very clear about why you would want to include a research component in a diploma, because then why is it a diploma? Even the normal bachelor's, 3-year bachelor's doesn't have a compulsory research component. So so there's that. You're changing the purpose of the qualification and how it is intended on the HEQSF, and you should really ask yourself, is this a diploma then? That's the one thing. But then to describe this as above threshold, as if you're doing something good, I think is actually not necessarily a good thing, because if a student is meant to have a diploma in a particular area for a particular industry or professional area and so on, you might not actually be doing them a favor by including a research component which they don't need, whereas they may need something else. This is just the HEQSF part, and the purpose of qualifications I'm quite clear about, but I would like to hear Sanele's response on this.
Well, again, my initial inclination is to say that no, the above threshold is not considered. What we consider through accreditation is whether or not the qualification meets the criteria, whether the program meets the criteria for accreditation. How above the institution is performing in terms of the expected criteria is something that will not be considered, or at least shouldn't be considered in the accreditation outcome. What the quality of the institution's quality systems will influence is that that level of functionality that we're going to talk about, the list that the QAF seeks to do. That is what really we are concerned about. The qualification standard, again, I want to emphasize, remember I said it speaks to minimum thresholds, doesn't speak to maximum or what goes above that. So I don't necessarily think that it's going to influence the accreditation, because accreditation looks at whether the criteria has been met. And if the criteria has not been met, then there are recommendations of how it should be met. If it has been met, then the program is accredited or not. So it's a pretty straightforward in terms of process, in terms of the way in which we consider the criteria. There are also considerations of good practice. Which is maybe where some of the things have to be considered. If something is of good practice, it does not really influence the outcome in terms of accreditation, but it does have a role in promoting quality in the sector, and because the institution can then share that good practice, part of the collaboration that we're talking about with other institutions, without ranking the institutions. And I want to say this because a good practice can be a small pocket of excellence in an institution. It can be a large thing. It can be sector-wide. It can be institutional-wide. We don't know what we mean by that. But in terms of criteria for accreditation, anything above the requirement is not going to change the accreditation itself. Thanks.
Okay, so there are quite a number of questions around the 50%. And I don't think we're going to resolve that in this session. But maybe just to mention that we are busy working on manuals of specific processes, and Dr. Dlamini and her team are specifically working on that process of how you change an existing program and when does it become a new program. Yeah, so Shirley says she speaks about the 50% in her workshops, and that will be in the manual that eventually comes out as well, sort of in writing as well. So that's something. And if you have any questions, she's gonna not be happy with me, but if you have any questions about it, you can write to her directly and just ask her for guidance on the 50% as well, because that is her process. I want to get back to the issue of the graduate attributes, that there were quite a number of questions on in the beginning. So there was the issue of whether the graduate attributes will link to changes in the SESM document. I think Odwa asked that. Odwa, the SESM document is a DHET document. It's not a CHE document. And my colleagues know that I have very particular views on that document, which I will not air publicly, but I've actually written on it. So we don't know. So the qualification standards will not directly influence the SESM document. And we have asked DHET to look at the SESM document and look at updating it. But that has not happened, and we are not aware of any process of the SESM document being updated soon. So in the short term, no, there's no relationship between the qualification standards and the SESM document. So there were questions around whether the graduate attributes in the qualifications are linked to the Turing, Erasmus and ADDIS conventions, or whether graduate attributes should be linked to institutions. And I'm assuming, Shirley, you meant, or I don't know who that was, whether they should be linked to the institution or to the qualification. And then also, how do graduate attributes link with competencies? Sanele, if you can.
Yeah. Maybe this the question about what the qualification standards or the attributes are linked to. They're linked to the qualification standards, which is in itself derived from the HQSF, and which is a child of the NQF. We have to consider the qualification standards in the context, the South African higher education context, of course, taking in mind the compatibility of the qualification across the board, at least internationally. But it's the way in which the disciplinary experts that develop the qualification standard, define the purpose of that qualification in the context of the country and in line with the NQF and the HQSF that the attributes are actually linked to. So the attributes are not really broader than the purpose of the qualification. They're actually part of the purpose of the qualification. What is it that in a student from a South African higher education system who studies this particular qualification should be able to do, and whether the purpose and the way in which we have designed the qualification allows the students to be able to perform at the same level internationally. That is really what the attributes are for. The attributes will differ from qualification to qualification. There's certain level of depending on the qualification type that we're talking about. But there's certain level of knowledge that you would want a university graduate or a graduate of higher education institution to have generally. But a graduate attributes linked to qualification standards will be different. The competences are very important. What is it that the graduate is able to do, particularly when you're talking about a professional qualification, one that would possibly lead to the registration of the graduate as a professional or practicing professional in that space. That's where the graduate attributes have to be placed. When we develop the qualification standard, there is research that's done, but in essence, what's looked at by the community of practice or the reference group is what is it that the qualification is currently framed in terms of the level descriptors, in terms of the outcomes, is at an NQF level, at an HQSF level, within the South African context, and how do you then structure a qualification standard in line with that. So we have an international compatibility in mind, but we are not really driven by other instruments except to ensure that we are aligned if there are international instruments as much as possible, understanding that the context is different. This is why also differentiation is important in developing the qualification standard and implementing any other process arising from the qualification standards, because that is key. Our context continues to be unique, and it will be for some time, and we must take this into account as we proceed. That is really about the attributes, but perhaps it's also an indication that in our advocacy we need to be more intentional in threshing out what we mean by graduate attributes and how they differ from one qualification to the other, and that is an essential question for us to reflect on in designing and improving our instruments going forward. The documents must be able to speak for themselves, such that such questions in future may not need to arise, because we're very clear on what constitutes a graduate attributes, and that is set at a national level to apply across the board, but also understanding that it is applied in a way that takes into account the different contexts of the individual institutions that offer the qualification. Thanks.
I know that in some institutions there are these conversations about graduate attributes of the institution, and that is okay too, because it speaks to the identity of the institution. It speaks to the identity of the graduates that come from that institution. But then there's a specificity to the qualification standard attributes. So say, for example, a student that went to the university, to Wits, may have certain attributes which mark them as a Wits student, but then there will be specific attributes which marks them as a Wits lawyer, for example, a law graduate with an LLB from Wits. So I think it has to do with the level of specificity. Yeah, so I see TK says the workshop was in person. There are no recordings, and they are all in person, and registration is closed. I was actually also worrying a little bit about people now pitching up at these workshops and without having registered, because there's limited, the number of seats and at these venues. So TK did post at some stage the email address for so it's HEQ management, M for management of the HEQSF at che.ac.za. So if you want information on those workshops, I suggest that you confirm first if there is space before you turn up. And if there is such a huge demand for it, I'm sure Dr. Dlamini will redo them in some form or another. So we have covered most of the questions now. If I've missed some of you, and I tried to link some of the questions. Oh, there was still about whether the graduate attributes are linked to the Turing or the Erasmus or the Addis Ababa process. So I think when the COP or the reference, it's currently called a reference group, but in the QAF they will be called communities of practice. When they meet, remember that those are specialists in their area, and they will know whether there are other kinds of qualification standards, and it has to do with benchmarking as well. So that benchmarking is a process that happens in the reference group with other kinds of qualification standards. So it might not be a specific linking it to those processes, either Erasmus or Addis Ababa, but the experts in that group will do benchmarking and decide on what's appropriate. In the broad consultation, the broader community will also tell the reference group who they should be benchmarking with. So it really depends very specifically on the qualification in question, and it might be very different for different qualifications. So Andre, no, you did not hear correctly. The proposal to extract SAQA information from the HEQC application did not work. I'm not sure. Shame, sorry. I'm not sure what you even mean by that. We tried to have a joint process with accreditation and registration with SAQA, and it's the process that didn't work. But the information does still go from the HEQC application to SAQA. It's just that our attempt at fast tracking that didn't work. So you don't have to worry about that. It's just that our attempt, yeah, that's the easiest way to say it. Our attempt at not having those processes consecutively, but have them concurrently didn't work for whatever reasons. And I'm not part of that process, so even if you ask me, I can't answer. But we are still working. It's not that we've given up. We are still working with SAQA very closely, and now that directorate called Management of HEQSF is sort of gaining a footing and really beginning to understand the work, and will look at specific processes. You will get a QAF lunch hours specifically from Dr. Dlamini about that. So yeah, and I've noted down a number of the burning issues that have come up that she will also speak to then. So we are over time by 1 minute, and I just want to thank Sanele again for taking up the call for me for other directors to also come and do QAF lunch hours, so that you also get to hear what some of the other processes are in relation to the QAF and how they will affect you. Thank you very much for the huge turnout as usual, and for the lively discussion. I hope it did assist to make standards standard qualification qualification standards more accessible to you, and that you will know what to do. And then if you do have any questions, you're welcome to also contact us. We will respond, and hopefully once the manual for standards development is out, and you will see how we are trying to streamline and integrate the HEPS and the qualification standards, that we can then, you'll see how we're trying to simplify and streamline some of our processes. And rest assured that your questions, the sometimes difficult questions you ask, actually helps us to fine tune the way we write our documents. It forms part of our consultation, and it actually helps us to improve our work. So thank you very much to everybody. Thank you to Sanela for presenting, and thank you again to Ntokozo, TK, and to Collins in the background. And I know that Fundi Kaniswe has also been here with us supporting her director. So thank you all to all our colleagues. And we'll see you in about a month's time again for the next QAF lunch hour. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Baba.